Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Crimson, and in this video we are going to be continuing our look through of the Dark Souls 3 Designworks artbook. So I don't have much to say in the intro. In part 1 we covered the environments and the different locations in the game, and in part 2 we are going to be starting right where we left off, which is the bosses, which I'm sure is what a lot of you guys really want to see. So let's just jump right into things. So this is our first boss, Ludex Gundyr. So like I said, he is the tutorial boss, or the first boss that acts as the tutorial boss. He is this massive knight with a huge halberd. He starts off as just a man in armor type boss, but then transforms halfway through when a monster snake made of abyss sludge bursts forth from his armor, which is quite cool and just kind of catches you off guard the first time. So the lore behind Ludex Gundyr is that he was originally someone who came to Firelink Shrine to start his journey and link the first flame. However, he failed and essentially became entombed in his boss arena, based on when we find him there is a massive a massive coiled sword sticking through him. So he acts now as the guardian, as almost a filter for both the in-game people who want to link the first flame, as well as a filter for new players, or at least that's what the community calls him. I do want to apologize. In part 1, I did say I would try my best not to mention anything about the bosses. However, I did fail on a couple attempts, so I am sorry about that. I just thought that I needed to explain who the boss was for the area to make sense. So this is him on his back, and we can see some of his different components of his armor. He has this kind of crown looking thing on the top of his helmet, which looks really cool. And I really like his breastplate. It's super massive, and he has like this kind of Roman-esque chest piece here, which has like the six-pack ribs and everything. I think that's so cool. So this is Ludex Gundyr once the abyssal creature bursts forth. So as you can see, this is quite different from the man that we just saw. So we go from this to this once he reaches half health. So you can see that he is still partially there, and this is his halberd that I was talking about. But this is the creature that bursts forth from him. So presumably this was inside of him the entire time, which is horrifying. And it bursts forth and it changes his moveset set completely from a warrior knight to a monster, essentially. One good thing about this creature is it is very weak to fire, so if you chose the fire bombs for your starting gift, he is quite easy to defeat that way. Next up, we have Vort of the Boreal Valley. So Vort is the boss that we fight at the end of the Wall of Lothric. The Lothric Castle Wall. I said that completely backwards. And he is one of the spies sent out from Irithyll by Lord Pontiff Sulyvahn. And him and another boss were given rings, which the Pontiff said would kind of protect them, but instead it turned them into these beasts. So he started off as a well-renowned knight. As you can see by his armor and his weaponry, he, looks like a knight. But when we fight him, he is crawling on all fours, he's howling, he's charging. He has completely resorted back to being essentially a feral animal, which is sad and just an example of Pontiff Sullivan's manipulation and how evil he is. This is the Cursed Rotten Greatwood, which we mentioned. So I mentioned in part 1 that the Cursed Rotten Greatwood came to be because so many people who were cursed with the undead were buried in this location. And all of that curse of the undead manifested into the roots and the soil and got absorbed by this tree and then became this kind of sentient mass of all of these different people. So you can see that there is some people hanging from his branches here. I'm not sure if you can actually make that out. I'll zoom in a little bit for you. You can see them kind of here and here. But this fight, like I said, it is mainly a gimmick fight. But what is very cool and also very horrifying is once you burst his main pustule on his front and he gets to about a quarter health, this very pale, gooish looking hand comes out and starts attacking you. So it's never clear what this actually is. Is this like another life form that was growing inside of him that had to emerge to try and defend itself as a last-ditch effort, or was this always part of it that was just inside? Dark Souls 3 has a kind of a tendency in some parts that bosses and some enemies start off start off looking fairly quote-unquote normal for Dark Souls, and then when their health gets low enough, something horrific bursts out from within them. So this is another example of that. So here we have two different bosses that are technically both demons and are very similar. So after you have gone through the undead settlement and make your way down to the start of the path of the crucifixion woods, instead of going down, you can go up and you can start the Onion Knights quest. And part of that is you have to fight this mini-boss. He's not actually a boss, but he is a mini-boss with a standard health bar, but has essentially the same health as a boss. And you fight him alongside the Onion Knight, which is so cool. So this is just a demon. He is on fire, as you can see, and he has this massive fiery mace. So you and the Onion Knight defeat him, and then you and the Onion Knight have a pint together, which is amazing. And then this is the Stray Demon. So we fight this demon on top of a bridge. This bridge originally led to Lothric Castle, but was destroyed, and we can climb up to this bridge in one of these structures by climbing up one of the main structures in the Farron Keep, and we end up on the top of this bridge. This bridge has a lot of very important crafting materials, upgrade materials like Titanite and stuff, and we fight this demon. So as you can see, he is called the Stray Demon, and despite being a demon, he has completely lost all of his fire. And instead of using fire attacks, he uses like ground-based attacks. So stuff like earthquakes, he'll throw rocks at you, he'll throw boulders at you. And once you defeat him, you get, I believe it's a very high piece of Titanite for this stage in the game. So it's quite good. Both of these bosses are completely optional. However, both of them, this one is essential for progressing the Onion Knights quest, and the Stray Demon is essential if you want to, not essential, is extremely recommended if you would like to get some access to some high-end Titanite very early on in the game. Next, we have the Crystal Sage. So this is an enemy that we fight on the road to the Crucifixion Woods. Again, he is just a crystal mage that we fight a couple of more times, especially in the archives. His main technique is shooting spells at you and then teleporting around the map, as well as creating illusions of himself. So the kind of gimmick here is you have to try and find the correct one. Pretty easy, if I'm being honest, and his health bar is fairly low, even for this stage in the game. Then here we have the Deacons of the Deep. So this is what we find guarding the coffin which Aldrich was in. So we find all kinds of the deacons, and again, these used to be very pious, noble, holy men, but because they followed Aldrich, who was a monster who ate men to the point that he literally became sludge, they started doing the same. So some of them are very decrepit here. This guy is extremely fat, so I'm assuming that this guy has also started eating people. This is the main pontiff here, as you can tell by his hat. The main deacon. But this down here is actually what the fight looks like. You have a bunch of deacons, and you have to try and find the one that is actually the boss, and you can tell which one is the boss because he has red eyes. And then once you kill him, the boss health bar transfers to a different enemy, and you just rinse and repeat. It is very easy, but at the same time, it is very easy to be overwhelmed. If you don't kind of do some crowd control, at least a little bit, you will get swarmed and killed quite quickly. And here is our player character just kind of looking on at this mass of disgusting holy men. So, yeah. Now here is one of, if not my favorite bosses in Dark Souls 3. This is the Abyss Watchers. So the Abyss Watchers are part of the Undead Legion, and the Undead Legion are essentially an entire army who are following in the footsteps of Knight Artorias from Dark Souls 1. They have something called the Wolf Blood. They have the Great Wolf Sword here, which we can unlock. And they have a very similar fighting style to Artorias. And since Artorias is known as the Abyss Walker, and since history is known that Artorias defeated Manus and halted the Abyss, they have started doing the same, but they are much more ruthless. They will level an entire civilization if they even suspect a whiff of the Abyss. So they are kind of zealots in a way. What's cool about the fight is that when we find the Abyss Watchers, when we find the Abyss Watchers, the Abyss has actually started to affect them and entered their blood. So because they are sworn and so dedicated to fighting the Abyss, they have started fighting each other. So when you first enter the arena, you have to fight one. Then once you defeat him, two more spawn. So the first one is hostile to you, but the second one is hostile to his brother-in-arms, which is really cool. So the two of them will be fighting at the same time you're fighting the main one. Once they're both dead, the second stage starts. So the arena is littered with corpses of Undead Legion members. And what happens is all of their blood leaves their bodies and all culminates in one Abyss member. And he has essentially become the strongest of them all. He has this massive flaming sword and is so powerful. So you have to defeat him, and then you finish the fight. I think it is so cool. And the intro cutscene where the Abyss Watcher holds the sword and the dagger in that stance is just beyond cool, in my opinion. Also, I really like their hat. that's just a personal thing. I just think it's a really nice hat, especially for like this time period. It's quite silly at the same time. So next is High Lord Walnir. So after we defeat the Abyss Watchers, we go into the Carthan Catacombs, and this was a civilization that had fallen to the Abyss. The Abyss Watchers did their thing and destroyed their civilization. That's why it's in the catacombs. The reason it fell to the Abyss is because of Walnir. So he got lost in the Abyss, and we fight him after making our way through and touching his gauntlet. However, he is trying to claw his way out from the Abyss, and the reason he's able to do this is because of these 3 bracelets on his arm. They are giving off this massive shining light, which is essentially what is saving him from being fully consumed. And it's actually quite sad because it's very obvious that he is absolutely terrified of the Abyss at this point. So we destroy all 3 of these rings, and then once we do so, he kind of lets out this scream or sound of anguish, and then is dragged into the Abyss, and that's him gone. So he is being completely consumed at this point, which is actually quite sad. We essentially doomed this poor person to eternity in the Abyss, which is kind of funny and also very, very sad at the same time. Next, we have the Old Demon King. So, the Old Demon King is located in the Smoldering Lake. He is the area boss. Again, this is a completely optional area and a completely optional boss. However, his story is actually quite interesting, and as per all things in Dark Souls 3, quite sad. So we find him in an arena, and around this arena are piles upon piles of demon bodies. So he, at this point in the Dark Souls story and timeline, is the very last demon. So he's the last of his kind, and he's also their king. So we end up fighting him, and he is slightly on fire, as you can see here. He is in a very weakened state when we find him. He's nowhere near as fiery as the one that we fought with the Onion Knight, despite him being their king. And we eventually whittle him down, and when he gets to about maybe a quarter of his health left, all of his fire leaves him, and he just collapses to the ground. And you essentially just have to finish him off. So you are killing the last member of a species who is completely defenseless at this point, which again is just awful. There is a very good argument to make that the player character in Dark Souls 3 is actually the bad guy, because seemingly all you're doing is killing either people who are just trying to survive or people who are the last of their kind. So yeah, while he is not an optional fight, I would strongly recommend fighting him if you have not played Dark Souls 3, just because his story is quite good. It's never really spelled out for you, but the environmental storytelling when you get into his boss arena will speak volumes. So here is Yhorm. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say one thing. So the Abyss Watchers, if we go back to them real quick, I apologize. The Abyss Watchers are one of the people that were meant to link the first flame, but they chose not to. So when we defeat them, they count as one of the ashes that we need to place on one of the thrones in Firelink Shrine. So this is one of the main bosses that we need to defeat for the story. Yhorm the Giant is another such person. So he was also eligible to link the first flame, and chose not to. So he is the leader of the profane capital, and his citizens absolutely hated him for being a giant, despite his best efforts to protect them at all cost. And after the everlasting flame, which is almost like a bastardization of the first flame, engulfed the capital and killed everyone, he essentially fell into a melancholy and just lost the will to live. So we fight him, and if you do the Onion Knights quest, he joins us in the boss fight. Yhorm and the Onion Knight are old friends, and the two of them made a promise. Yhorm made the Onion Knight swear that if he ever failed to link the first flame, that the Onion Knight is to come and kill him. The weapon the Onion Knight uses is a massive greatsword called the Storm Ruler, which is a weapon specifically designed to kill giants, and this was actually given to him by Yhorm. So Yhorm is so serious about this that he literally gave his friend the only weapon capable of actually killing him. So in the boss fight, we are able to pick up a Storm Ruler of our own, and us, along with the Onion Knight, defeat Yhorm. So that is two of the people needed to be killed for us to place them on their thrones. So again, this is an essential boss fight. Next up, we have the Pontiff Sulyvahn. So the Pontiff Sulyvahn is, up until this point in the game, easily the hardest fight that you have fought so far. So he has usurped the power of the royal family. He has imprisoned them in the Anor Londo capital, and he has given Gwyndolin over to Aldrich to eat. So when we find him, he is in the height of his power, and he has two massive swords which he uses, one with lunar magic, one with fire magic. So he has some incredible combos, but what makes him quite difficult is he is able to create copies of himself. And these copies are not just illusions, these copies are able to do as much damage as the Pontiff, as well as having their own health bar. And these guys do not disappear, so you have to, if you want the illusion to disappear, you have to kill it, as well as trying to kill the Pontiff. So it is a very, very good boss fight. Like many bosses in Dark Souls 3, if you know how to parry him, he essentially becomes a piece of cake. But if you do not parry him that much, or choose not to parry him, he is an incredible fight, and is definitely one of the best bosses in the base game of Dark Souls 3. And here is a picture of his crown. Also, this is the man who sent Vort off to Lothric Castle and gave him the ring that transformed him into a beast, essentially. There is another another boss, which the Pontiff did the same thing to, but we will get to them once they appear. Next, we have Aldrich, Devourer of Gods. So, as I said in part 1, Aldrich was another person who had the ability to link the first flame, but did not. Again, this was not due to virtue, but due to might alone. He ate so many men that he bloated like a pig and transformed into this sludge. So he went from eating men to then conspiring with the Pontiff to eat a god, and that god is Gwyndolin, the youngest son of Lord Gwyn. So when we fight Aldrich, we are actually attacking Aldrich's body, yes, but the attacks that are being used against us are those of Gwyndolin. So it's not quite confirmed what is actually happening. Is it that Aldrich, after consuming Gwendolyn, has gained his powers and his magic? Or is it that Gwendolyn hasn't actually been consumed yet and is trying to fight us off while still being aware? There's arguments for both sides. I like to think that Gwendolyn is actually fighting us himself, because if you look at the concept art here, Gwendolyn is still essentially all there from the waist up. His hands, his shoulders, his chest, his head, and his kind of face mask crown thingy. So I like to think that it is Gwendolyn trying to attack us, maybe having been corrupted by Aldrich into thinking that they are now one or something. But it is stated also that Aldrich gains the abilities of those he consumes. So it could also be that Aldrich has just gained Gwendolyn's magical prowess and is using the magic that Gwendolyn uses, which is mainly lunar magic, against us. Next up, we have the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. So the Dancer is the other knight that the Pontiff sent off. So he sent off the Dancer and Vort. So the Dancer is one of the bosses that we have to fight to enter the interior of Lothric Castle. And similar to Vort, she was given the same ring, and this transformed her into a beast. As we find her, she is much more beast-like. She's not quite as much as a beast as Vort is, but she is not quite fully human either. It is said here that she was originally someone of high birth, but once the Pontiff took over, he essentially made her his personal dancer as like a form of humiliation, and then essentially sent her out on recon missions. So when we find her, she's guarding the entrance to the castle. You can see that her armor is laid out here. Her face armor and head armor is quite cool. She has this veil on her and has this kind of slitted mask that you can see with this mask here. This is very similar to like a dancer or performance mask. It reminds me of a mask that someone might wear to like a fancy ball or masquerade. And she fights similar to the Pontiff with two different weapons, two kind of curved swords like this one. And unlike Vort, who fights very bestial by charging and all that, the Dancer is extremely graceful. She has elegant swings, she spins, she has all kind of acrobatics, so showing that she is using her skills as a dancer as part of her sword technique, which I think is so cool lore-wise. So our next boss is the Dragon Slayer armor. So this boss is very reminiscent of Ornstein from Dark Souls 1. What is interesting about him, however, is first off, he uses the same kind of magic as Ornstein, the lightning magic. So that's the name, the Dragon Slayer. So assumably whoever wore this armor was also skilled in that same type of magic. The most interesting part, though, is this armor is not actually being worn by anyone when we fight it. There are pilgrim angels all around the boss fight, and they are essentially using this armor as a puppet. So you are basically fighting a hollow set of armor, but the armor seems to have retained memories of the fighting style of its wearer, which is really cool. So you can see he has this massive axe, which deals significant lightning damage, and a huge shield. So attacking him on his left side is not a good idea, and he is quite a challenging foe. and also the angels that are controlling him occasionally launch a volley of some kind of projectiles at you, which can be hard to dodge because it's very difficult to see them coming. I don't have too much else to say about this boss, but yeah, it's a very cool concept of actually fighting a hollow set of armor being puppeted. And you might not be able to see it, but he has a red plume on the back of his helmet. I'm saying his, it's an empty set of armor, so I apologize. It's technically an it, I would say, because it's just, metal. These are the angels that I was talking about. So these are actually called pilgrim butterflies, not angels. I apologize. The angels are something else, but we will save that for when we get there. So the pilgrims are pilgrims from Londor that have made a pilgrimage to Lothric. And some of them have transformed into these butterflies and are then flying towards the castle itself. Now, these are not anywhere near nice looking butterflies at all. These things are straight out of a Lovecraft novel. Their wings are just made up of essentially tendrils or veins, I'm not quite sure. The actual body of the butterfly is here, and you can see his arms have sprouted and his legs have sprouted. His legs almost look like tree roots. Actually, everything about him kind of looks very root-like. I'll try and hold it up so you guys can see the top picture better. But yeah, so these individuals are what is controlling the Dragon Slayer armor. So quite terrifying. Both that these things are actually able to control non-sentient objects, and also just that they exist. Like if I saw this thing, I would just run. And also, sorry, once we defeat the Dragon Slayer armor, the butterflies controlling it also die. So I'm not sure why they die. Maybe it's because their consciousness was linked to the armor. So when we killed the armor, we killed their consciousness. That's just a spitball I'm kind of shooting out there. I'm sure there is an actual explanation. I just cannot remember that specific lore tidbit. Next up, we have the twin princes, Lorien, elder prince and Lothric, the younger prince. So I did briefly explain Lothric and Lorien, so I'll just quickly reiterate it. So Lothric is the heir to the Lothric crown and was essentially bred and raised to Link the First Flame. He is a direct descendant of Lord Gwyn, and so is his brother Lorien. I believe Lorien is also a direct descendant, but Lothric is the one who was meant to Link the First Flame. So Lothric, however, was born extremely sickly. He is a very pale, frail child with elongated fingers and hands and feet. His face is covered by a cowl, so we don't actually see what he looks like. And while his family reveres him for trying to coerce him and essentially groom him into becoming Gwyn's heir, they have a disdain towards him based on his appearance. Lorien, on the other hand, is the kind of prince that the family would have wanted, an extremely skilled swordsman. He fought a demon prince in single combat and won. However, when he fought the demon, he plunged his sword into the demon's heart and killed it, but that made his sword forever imbued with demonic fire. So he has this really cool flaming sword that he uses. But in his fight with the demon prince, he was severely wounded and lost the use of his legs. It's never specified what actually happened. if his legs were just broken, if he was paralyzed, if he got a spinal injury, but he can no longer walk. So him and Lothric have a very close bond. For as much as the rest of the family kind of despises Prince Lothric, Lorien loves his brother to bits. So when we fight them, or when we go to fight Lothric, we fight Lorien as well. And the way this boss fight works is Lothric, being this kind of small, emaciated man, is hanging on Lorien's back. So Lorien fights us with his sword, and if you think that the fact that he cannot walk makes him less of a swordsman, you are very, very wrong. He is extremely powerful, but also Lothric is on his back casting miracles at you the whole time. And he also is able to teleport Lorien around the map. So he can teleport Lorien directly behind you mid-swing. So it makes the fight kind of frustrating and kind of funny. This fight is very infamous in the Souls community. So the goal of this fight is to kill Lothric. Lothric's health bar is a lot smaller than Lorien's. However, Lorien is mainly the person you're actually attacking because Lothric is this small little figure clinging to his back. So every time you kill Lorien, he falls to the ground and you get a chance to go in and wail on Prince Lothric. But after about maybe 10 seconds, Lothric revives his brother, and his brother comes back with about half health or maybe a little bit more. So until you kill Lothric, Lorien just keeps coming back, which is so cool. And it just proves that, despite dying countless times, he's still willing to protect his brother. So again, this is also part of my theory that we play as the villain in Dark Souls 3, because we're essentially killing a crippled warrior and a sickly prince who are just trying to defend themselves, essentially, which is very, very sad if you think about it. Here we have some amazing art. So this is Lorien before he lost the use of his legs. You can see that he is massive in this really gorgeous armor, and he has his helmet here. He has this long hair that is very similar to like the white blonde hair of the royal family in Dark Souls 1. And then here we have Lothric. So as you can see, compared to Lorien, Lothric is tiny. He's extremely emaciated. You can kind of see a bit of his hands here, how they're like very grotesque, they're extremely elongated with these kind of pinched fingers, and he wears a cowl over his face, which is interesting. What I do find cool is, since they are of the line of Gwyn, that Lorien also has some kind of helmet or face mask covering his eyes, kind of similar to Gwendolyn. Maybe that's just a coincidence, but I really like it. So this is another picture of Lorien and Lothric. So this is Lorien from the back with his cape and his sword, and Lothric here on his knees praying. I'm assuming he's casting some kind of incantation here. So this is Osiris, the consumed king. So another picture of... No, there's not. Okay. So Osiris is the king of Lothric. Lothric, it's confusing because the kingdom is called Lothric, but the prince is called Lothric. So Osiris is the king of the kingdom of Lothric. However, he became obsessed with trying to become a dragon and ended up transforming into this creature, which looks kind of draconic. It's almost very similar to Seath the Scaleless, but he has gone completely mad. When we enter his boss arena, he is talking and holding a child called Ocelot. And he starts off being very concerned and protective of Ocelot during his boss fight. You know, he's attacking you while also kind of holding baby Ocelot out of danger. And the entire time you fight him, you can hear the cries of baby Ocelot. Then when you get into half health, he completely enrages, and all of his parental instincts go out the window as he reverts back to essentially just being an animal. And he slams baby Ocelot on the ground, and when he does this, the cries stop. So there's two kind of fan theories about baby Ocelot. So the first is that due to him being born of a magical bloodline and having this as his father, that Ocelot is just invisible, and that's why we cannot see him. And it is true that Osiris essentially kills Ocelot in the middle of the fight. The second theory is that because Osiris is essentially completely mad, that Ocelot is not real, that Ocelot is a figment of his imagination, he does not exist, and the cries we just hear are meant to kind of make us think that he exists. So his parental instincts trying to protect Ocelot, he's not protecting anything. When he kills Ocelot, he's not actually killing a child, an infant, because Ocelot does not exist. It's just a delusion from his madness. There's really no clear answer. I personally believe that Ocelot does not exist. I think that is just a figment of a mad king's imagination. So let us continue. So next we have the Ancient Wyvern, and I'm not going to be spending too much time on this boss because this boss is one of the worst bosses in the game, if you can even call it a boss. So this is the first boss that we encounter when we get to Archdragon Peak. However, it is not a boss fight. A massive wyvern jumps down in front of you, and instead of fighting it normally like you might in other From Software games, you have to run around a gauntlet that takes about 3 minutes. Then you get on top of a veg and you do a plunging attack down onto his head, and that kills him in one hit. That's it. That's the entire fight. It is kind of cool the first time, and after that, it is so bad. I really wish they did something better with this boss because, I mean, just look at this dragon. It looks so cool. It would have been amazing to fight like one of the ancients. I know it's a wyvern, but it's one of the ancients, so it's a very missed opportunity in my opinion. Next up, we have the absolute bane of Dark Souls 3 casuals, and that is the Nameless King. So the Nameless King, actually I just want to see if this, okay, so I'm just going to talk about what's on this page here. So the Nameless King is the son of Gwyn. If you remember in Dark Souls 1, Gwyn's firstborn son was stricken from the annals of history with his name erased because he did something so awful that Gwyn essentially erased him from history. And what that was is he allied himself with the dragons. If you remember, Gwyn came into power by going to war with the dragons and essentially genociding them. So having his firstborn son decide to side with the dragons makes a lot of sense of why Gwyn would be so mad as to essentially erase him from history. So he is in Archdragon Peak. That's why he's called the Nameless King, because his name was essentially erased. and he flies his, I don't know what this is actually called. It's not quite a dragon, but it's very bird-like. So it's like a mixture between a dragon and a massive bird of some kind. Very, very cool design. But the Nameless King, since he is Gwyn's firstborn son, is extremely powerful, has extremely good magic, with the lightning style that is runs in the family. And yeah, so there's more about the Nameless King, which we are going to talk about. So this is another picture of the Nameless King here. So you see he has this massive white hair, this huge spear, which I'm assuming was used to slay dragons at some point because it does have the lightning magic. So this fight has two stages. The first stage is we fight him while he is riding around on top of his beast. As you can see here, it is very avian looking. Doesn't really have scales at all. But once we defeat the dragon, not the dragon, I'm just going to call this his beast instead of dragon because I don't really know what to call it. He practices the tradition that happens when someone close to you dies in his family. If you remember in Dark Souls 1, during the Ornstein and Smough fight, whenever one of them dies, the other one plunges their weapon into their body and absorbs their power. Ornstein in particular is the best example. If you kill Smough first, Ornstein goes up to Smough's body, kind of laments, and drives his spear into Smough's corpse and gains power from it. That is exactly what the Nameless King does to his beast. And then after that, the second phase begins, and he is a absolute menace on foot. Whether you find him more difficult on foot or on the back of his beast is basically just depending on what kind of bosses you find more difficult. If you find large kind of animal bosses harder, or if you find one-on-one duels harder, it's completely dependent on that. But the Nameless King is easily the hardest boss in the base game of Dark Souls 3. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about him. I think I've covered everything. He is really good. His spear does so much damage. He has a mixture of thrusting attacks, sweeping attacks, lightning attacks. He hits you essentially with everything. And if you remember in part 1, when we were talking about Archdragon Peak, I mentioned how we found Ornstein's armor in Archdragon Peak, and I said it's kind of weird how we find Ornstein's armor, who was a dragon slayer who served Gwyn, in a temple dedicated to dragons. So what can be inferred is Ornstein essentially left Anor Londo and traveled to Archdragon Peak to serve the Nameless King, which is quite cool. And you can see that he does actually have a crown here. So presumably this is the same crown that he was given when he was still officially Gwyn's son. But yeah, definitely one of the best boss fights in any From Software game, and is one of my favorite bosses of all time in any video game. But he is extremely difficult. Next, we have the Soul of Cinder. So this is the final boss of the game. He, like I said in the end part of the part 1 of the video, he is an amalgamation of every single person who has linked the flame since Gwyn, and his moveset reflects that with all kinds of weapons. Curved swords, great swords, straight swords, spears, halberds, axes, sorceries, miracles, pyromancies, absolutely everything this guy throws at you. And the what you can infer is that all of these different movesets were the movesets and skills used by different warriors who linked the flame in eons past. And this is even more corroborated when he starts using Gwyn's attacks, and Gwyn's theme even starts playing. So this picture here is absolutely amazing. So we see him on fire, his crown is on fire, with this massive kind of flaming cape behind him. He doesn't have a cape in the game, but this, I'm not sure if this is actually a cape or just fire behind him, but it makes some very cool imagery. And he has his coiled sword here, which is also on fire, which makes sense since, you know, he's essentially the guardian of the kiln. Here is some more concept art of the Soul of Cinder. So this is him here without the flames. This looks more like the armor set that our player character gets. We do unlock his armor set. He looks a lot smaller and a lot thinner than the Soul of Cinder does. But this is kind of how it looks when our player character equips the armor. So next up is a new section called the enemies, and this section will be a lot faster as I will not be spending an eternity going over each individual type of enemy. So here we just have a generic hollow soldiers. Here we have a starved hound with a distended gut. So this is has a distended gut because he is full of parasites and worms. This is one of the early Lothric knights that we encounter in the Wall of Lothric. And then here is another starved hound, but without the parasites. Next, we have the Grand Archives Scholar. So this is someone who has the candle wax on his head to avoid the ghosts, as well as is wielding what looks like a knife fashioned out of wax, which is quite cool. So here we have the Winged Knight. We fight one of these actually very early in the game. And then here we have the Gertrude's Knight. So it's interesting that the Winged Knight does not actually have wings, but the knight with wings is called the Gertrude Knight. I just kind of find that funny. So yeah, these guys are very angelic looking. And are quite cool. They are an extreme late game enemy and are very tanky. Next we have a Peasant Hollow. So this is what we find in the Undead Settlement. Here is the Cathedral Evangelist. So these guys go around trying to convince people to come back to the Cathedral of the Deep, so that the high priests and vicars and whatnot can eat them. Then here we have a hollow manservant. So you can see that he has a cage on his back or a piece of wood. Presumably the piece of wood, maybe he was tied to it and broke free. But he has this really cool weapon. It's like a double-handed saw, which he uses to like slam down on you. This is a hollow slave. So if you remember in part 1, I spoke about an NPC character named Greyrat. This is what Greyrat looks like, but I'm sure we'll get to him when we get to characters. This is a cage spider. So this is essentially a bunch of people, or hollows, put into one tiny cage and have become almost like the human equivalent of a rat king. If you don't know what that is, do not look it up. I would not recommend it. But we find this in the Irithyll dungeon. Very scary area. So here we have one of the Irithyll Knights, which is actually the cover of the book. Next up, we have a Greater Crab, which we find in the Farron Keep. We have a Rotten Slug, which we also find in the Farron Keep. Actually, we find all of these in the Farron Keep. So this is a Corvian. So this is a different version of an enemy that has appeared in Dark Souls 1, and it's an NPC in Dark Souls 2. I'm not sure if they are meant to be the same species. This one looks like a lot, almost like the design has been perverted a bit, as it looks quite different from the Corvians in the previous game. This is a Grue, so this is a kind of bestial enemy that attacks you in the Farron Keep and jumps on you and does immense damage. He looks very similar to something you might find in Bloodborne. So next up we have So next up we have the Elder Grue, which is this guy here. Then we have the Dark Wraith, which is so cool. I believe this is the Dark Wraith's first appearance since Dark Souls 1. And then here we have the Cathedral Grave Warden, and this is the Lycanthrope. So both of these, especially the Lycanthrope, is very dangerous. I really like the Dark Wraiths in these games. I think the armor and the design is so cool. I only learned about a year ago that the skull armor, the skull mask and everything on the armor is actually just armor, not their body. That there's actually just a man or a woman inside. I thought they were like undead warriors that had skulls for faces. Still equally cool, but I was slightly disappointed when I learned that bit of information. So next up we have an infested corpse. We find these as we make our way through to the Cathedral of the Deep. This is the Cathedral Knight of the Deep, so this is one of the heavy knights we find in the interior of the cathedral. This is a Devout of the Deep, so this is more of your common soldier that defends the cathedral. This is one of the corpse grub, so these are essentially just beasts completely made of worms. If these things grab you, you get worms all over you, which cause bleed damage and poison damage, I believe, and the only way to get rid of them is to equip a torch. Over here we have the Ravenous Crystal Lizard. So this is an enemy that we find actually right at the start of the game. If you go, and once you get the Estus Flask, instead of going forward, if you take a sharp right, you go and encounter this enemy. And it is in a very difficult boss, but you get some extremely high-level Titanite, essentially at the beginning of the game. Now, for those of you who have read Berserk, this enemy is essentially identical to one of the characters in Berserk named Grunbeld, who is an apostle, and his apostle form is a massive crystal dragon. So this is another example of Miyazaki taking inspiration from Berserk. However, this time it's not really inspiration, he kind of just essentially copied it. Not a complaint, as both designs are really cool, but yeah. If you are interested, I would recommend watching a video of all the Berserk references in FromSoft games. So here we have a Deep Accursed, which are like these spider-looking things. They are so terrifying. We find a couple of these in the game. One of them is like a jump scare inside the cathedral. They are weak to fire though. This is the Man Grub, so these enemies kind of attack us. They're very weak though. This is what have become of the servants of Rosaria. If you are people who have respect or transformed themselves too many times with rebirths. This is a giant slave. So we find a couple of these guys. We find one of them on the top of the tower where we first meet the Onion Knight. He is the guy that is shooting the arrows at us at the end of the undead settlement. And we can go up to him and we have two options. We can either just kill him or we can just ask him to stop. And it is cool that, you know, you can just say, hey man, can you like please stop? And he's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm sorry. So it's really cool that you can actually just solve this by being polite. Next up, we have some skeletons and skeleton swordsmen. These are located in the catacombs, so very, very cool. This is a demon cleric. So we find these guys in the smoldering lake, as well as these massive worms, very reminiscent of the dune worms. In game, they are just called the Karthus sandworm. And also, as I said, these guys are found in the Karthus catacombs. So it's insinuated that Karthus was maybe a desert kingdom. So this is just a fire witch here, which is kind of interesting because they look much more like an ice type of enemy. And especially since we encounter them in Irithyll, which is a mainly ice-based area. But no, they are capable of insane fire magic. Then we have a Irithyll slave. So this is almost like a shadow person that has been enslaved. Then we have a Irithyll beast hound, which is essentially a dog with the face of a man, or like the skull of a man, which is terrifying. Here is a Pontiff Knight. So this is one of the Knights of Irithyll. This is one of the types of enemies that appears on the cover of the book that we actually just saw a couple of pages ago. Next up, we have the Sullivan's Beast. So this guy comes at you on the bridge when you first enter Irithyll, and then he disappears when he's almost dead. And then when you go down onto the lake bottom towards the dungeons, he reappears. Now, if you again have read Berserk, this is essentially a one-to-one copy of the Beast of Darkness. I would strongly recommend looking it up. Actually, I might put a picture of the Beast of Darkness somewhere here, just so you guys can see. Again, not a complaint that they took something out of Berserk. If there's any kind of dark sci-fi manga that would make great enemies in video games, it is definitely Berserk, but it is still very, very cool. Next up, we have the Sewer Centipede, which are these women which have been transformed into these things. They are absolutely disgusting. Not many enemies in these games actually give me like a visceral reaction of disgust, however this one does. Next we just have a wretch. We find him in the Irithyll dungeon. The gargoyle. So the gargoyles we encounter after we exit the dungeon and make our way across the bridge to the Profane Capital, where we have to fight a couple of them, and then we fight some more later on in the Profane Capital. This is the jailer. This is the enemy that I spoke about that essentially depletes all your health and gives you like 10 HP. This is the Monstrosity of Sin. So these are like giant hippos with all these eyes and have a hand for a head. These used to be people. I believe they actually used to be women or sorceresses. I could be wrong about that, but essentially they got transformed into these things. Next, we have the Serpent Man Summoner. So this is an enemy that we fight in Archdragon Peak. This is kind of cool here, how it actually shows the anatomy. So you see that because all we see here is this massive robes and then this massive neck coming out. But we see that they have these legs here, and then they go up into this very curved body, and then their neck and their head pops out. This is one of the Serpent Men. So these guys are much more of the warriors. These guys are like the mages, whereas these are the warriors. They attack you with dual knives. Very, very cool. This one and this one kind of have a smaller head, whereas this one here is much more serpentine and is able to extend its head and lash out with its fangs. So quite cool. It is interesting how some of the enemies in this game, the enemies in Archdragon Peak are more serpentine rather than draconic, but maybe that's just me reading too much into it. So next up is NPCs. So starting off the NPCs, we have the Firekeeper. So the Firekeepers have always been present in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. However, I think the Firekeeper in Dark Souls 3 is easily the best version of the Firekeeper. Her design is really cool. The piece of jewelry covering her eyes is really, really cool. I just really like her design. She is essentially in service of helping the unkindled ash. And yeah, I actually have a tattoo of the Dark Souls 3 Firekeeper, like a big one on the inside of my forearm. I'll put a picture of it somewhere here-ish. But yeah, I really like this Firekeeper. I think she is so cool and also very pretty. So this is Ludwig of Courland. So as I said in part 1, all of the people who were meant to link the first flame are absent in Firelink Shrine, except for one, and that is the Ludwig, who is just waiting on his throne. He has not lit the first flame, not because he does not want to or has an objection to it, but just because he is so small and so meek and so physically weak that he cannot. He's a very kind man, very soft-spoken, but also he is also the NPC that allows us to gain access to boss weapons and boss spells. So this is Ringfinger Leonhard. So we encounter this guy in Firelink Shrine for the first time, I believe, and I believe he is one of the NPCs that gives us the access to the Infinite Invasion item. Really cool design. I really, really like his hat and his cape. Again, he looks very similar to Bloodborne. He looks like a hunter with that hat. Next, we have Yoel of Londor. So Yoel is one of the pilgrims that has made his way to Lothric. So we find him after we first leave the High Wall of Lothric. And when we first arrive, before we actually go into the undead settlement, we can go backwards and go to a bridge which is being collapsed, and there are a bunch of pilgrims, about maybe 50 of them, that have all died except for Yoel. And Yoel sees us, he recognizes us for what he is, and offers to take us into his service, and he gives us the ability later on, every couple of times we die, he gives us 1 Neville point seemingly for free, but it is not for free. I'm not going to say what the cost is, but yeah, it is not for free, so keep that in mind if you decide to level up with Yoel. Next is one of my favorite NPCs, Yuria of Londor. So we don't really know that much about Londor in the game. Londor is essentially a city built by hollows for hollows. So Yuria has 3 sisters, and 3 of them founded a church in Londor. So there is Yuria, which we see here, there is Lillian, and there is Fried. So Fried is also the same sister Fried which we encounter in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. She is quite mysterious and is important for one of the best endings in the game. The usurpation of Flame Emblem, ending where you essentially become the Lord of Londor. It's a very complicated ending to get. It's almost impossible if you go in blind on your first playthrough, but it is so much fun to get through on a different playthrough, and is an amazing ending. Probably the best ending in the game, in my opinion. Next up, we have Aegon of Karim. So Aegon is traveling with a maiden who wants to become a firekeeper. However, she is cursed with an illness where she is constantly being covered in parasites. So the poor woman is blind and is in agony all day, every day, with pests nibbling at her and eating her. And Aegon is her sworn protector. He has this really cool armor set with this dragon helmet, and he has this massive warhammer, which is actually very decorative. And based on your quest line with him, you have the choice of giving his maiden, which we will talk about once we get to her, multiple different tomes to unlock different spells. If you give her holy scrolls to unlock miracles, then Aegon becomes quite pleased. However, and this also allows her to become kind of like a bit of a firekeeper. But if you give her dark scrolls with dark magic, so stuff like black flame and evil looking magic, Aegon becomes increasingly hostile. Because he tells you right at the start that, if you're willing to help the lady, then he won't be your ally, but he will not harm you. But if you endanger her or cause her any bit of harm, he will essentially kill you with no hesitation. So really, really cool. Next, we have Cornyx of the Great Swamp. So Cornyx is a character that we find in the Undead Settlement, locked in a cage, and he is our person who teaches us pyromancy. So when we find new pyromancy tomes, we bring it to him. This is one of the best parts of the Firelink Shrine in Dark Souls 3, is all of these characters make their way back to Firelink. So Firelink starts off with not that many people in it, but eventually it is packed to the brim with different characters. Next, we have Sirris of the Sunless Realm. So Sirris of the Sunless Realm has a very interesting quest. I cannot remember all of it exactly, but she wants to hunt down Bloody Fingers and then essentially fight one of the purple phantoms who actually turns out to be her uncle. Very good quest line, but there's a lot of parameters to be able to unlock this. If you do too many invasions, she will not spawn, or she will become hostile. If you join the Rosaria Covenant, she will become hostile or not spawn. So yeah, here is Holy Knight Hardrick. So this is the NPC that we fight at the end of Sirris's quest, who is her uncle. He is also the person who we speak to join the Covenant. I can't remember the name of the Covenant, but it's the Mad something, and they are the Purple Phantoms, which is the best Covenant in the game. They can essentially act as someone who can either attack the hosts and his allies or attack other invaders. So usually when you invade as part of this Covenant, you join in like a absolute cluster going on with the battle going on between invaders and defenders. Next, we have Horus the Hushed. So Horus the Hushed, that's a tongue twister, is someone who was taken by Aldrich as a child, along with another character who we will speak about shortly. And him and his companion managed to escape, and they were the only two children to do so. However, in the process, Horus lost his tongue, so he is silent. He is very powerful. Do not let his quiet nature deceive you. And he is extremely protective of his childhood friend, but I'm not going to say who that is until we get to her. Next is Orbeck of Wilhelm. Not much to say about him. He just kind of teaches you some sorceries, but he is very snobby about it. So next we have the Fallen Knight, really, really cool. Next over here we have the Yellowfinger Hazel. So this is an NPC which appears to first be hostile, and he has the, I can't remember what this crown is called, but it is very similar to the yellow robe in Demon Souls. I believe this has made an appearance in Dark Souls 2 as well, but I really like this. I think it's quite a funny looking headgear. Next is Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth. So Rosaria is the NPC who we can join a covenant to rebirth. We can do two things by rebirthing. We can either change our character's appearance or respec our character. Now, in the game, we are able to do this essentially unlimited times. However, in the lore, people who do it too many times end up becoming these man slugs, which you can see around her here. It's not clear whether she is evil or nice, as she is technically providing a service by helping people become helping people become who they want to be. And even when they turn into man slugs, she takes care of them. But at the same time, she sends people out to cut the tongues out of dead bodies of other ashen ones that we find. Next, we have Kala. So Kala is a witch that we find in the Irithyll dungeon, and we're able to free her and bring her back to Firelink, who she can teach us some very powerful dark magic. Here is the court sorcerer, Eamon. I actually cannot remember anything about this character. I do apologize about that. I completely have forgotten him, where he is, and what he does. So I am sorry if this is like your favorite character or something. Next, we have Darkmoon Company Captain Yorshka. So the Darkmoons were previously the faction led by Gwendolyn. But since Gwendolyn is no longer in the picture, she has been imprisoned in a tower, which you have to walk through an invisible bridge to get to her, and she brings you into this covenant. And the final thing you unlock for this covenant by bringing her 30 Concords well kept is Moonlight Blade, which is a spell. It is the most powerful weapon-based spell in the game. I spent hours farming this. You have to farm them on Silver Knights, and the drop rate is so low, it's crazy. Like, I farmed it for an hour once, and I got 3. So next is the Londo Pale Shade, and here is the Black Hand Gotthard. So 2 other NPCs which we come across, quite cool. So Gotthard we find dead at the gates of the archives, and on his corpse is a key that we need to progress. Also, his hat is quite cool. So next up, we have the Exile, which is almost a barbarian type enemy, and the Old Wolf of Farron. Now, next up is classes, but I am actually in shock because there is a major character that this character section has not covered. I'm just going to quickly pause the video to see if I missed this character, and if not, I'll just explain him myself. Okay, so this character is not featured in this book, which is kind of weird seeing as how important they are. So this character is Anri. So I will put a picture of Anri up on screen here. So Anri is Horace's companion. She was the girl who escaped from Aldrich with him, and since then they have been on the run, and now that they are fully grown and knights, they are making their journey back to the Cathedral of the Deep to kill Aldrich. Now, for you, if you are pursuing the Lord of Londor ending, Anri becomes your wife. And this is done through a Lothric marriage ceremony. So she is killed by Uria, and then we meet someone in one of the churches in Irithyll who gives us a special type of key. Once we get this key and get to Anor Londo, we are able to access a secret door. We then go up to another pilgrim type enemy who gives us a ceremonial sword. We take the sword and we continue forward, and Anri is laying dead with her armor and everything intact. She's holding her sword in a very noble burial type. But however, there was a cloth over her face. So you take this sword and you drive it down into her face, and this becomes this is what makes her become your wife. What's cool about Anri is that if your character is a male, she is a female. If your character is a female, he is a male. I always prefer the female Anri, but that's just me. And then in the ending of the game, if you get the a Usurper of Fire ending where you become the Lord of Londor, you see in the background that Anri is actually brought back to life and is kneeling to you. So she is your wife. So you are the Lord of Londor, and by extension, she becomes the Queen of Londor. I am really surprised that that is not included in this book. That's actually like a major oversight. But yeah, I won't go on it too much more about it. So next up is the classes. So this is the Deprived. Then we have the Mercenary, who has this kind of vagabond style look to them, which is quite cool. Then we have the Knight, which is my favorite, just because his armor is so cool. Next, we have the Warrior. So the Warrior starts off with 2 axes, as well as some lighter armor, but chainmail armor. This is some different pictures of him from the side, his armor, his helmet, his back, his greaves. So, yeah, he looks kind of like a northern warrior, or maybe like a Viking or something. Next up, we have the Herald. So the Herald is kind of similar to the Knight, however, much less health, and is much more suited towards dex, I believe. The chest piece is quite cool, but they start with a rapier or some other kind of small, fast-moving stabbing sword, which is not personally my cup of tea, but it is a very good class. Next, we have the Thief. So the Thief is very similar to the Thief in previous games. So the Thief starts off in kind of rags with a hood and a scarf over their face. They start with a dagger and some other stuff. I believe they have like a small shield. Thief is a very good class to choose. There isn't any specific ability, like if you choose Thief in Dark Souls 1, you automatically spawn with the Master Key, whereas there's no such thing like that in Dark Souls 3, but the Thief is definitely a very good choice. I have played as the Thief a couple of times, and it is quite fun. Next up, we have the Assassin. So we see them here, they have this cowl over their head, quite cool. Not much to say about them because I've never played them or really gone into too much detail about their class. Next up, we have the Sorcerer. So this is your main mage build class. So you see them in their robes. Very, very cool looking. I'm not a magic person or a sorcery person in Souls games. I like my incantations and miracles, but I do not like sorceries. I just think it kind of is essentially these games on easy mode. Next we have the Pyromancer. So similar how to the Sorcerer specializes in sorceries, the Pyromancer specializes in fire magic and fireballs. So another great class for the early game, especially against Ludex Gundyr once he has transformed, as his transformed version is very weak to fire. Next, we have the Cleric. So this is your faith class, I believe. I've never actually played as the Cleric, but it is quite cool. I like his hat, and I like this kind of thing on his back. It looks very similar to the Londor Pilgrims. Then here we have the dragons. So this is the Dark Souls 3 dragon form that we take. As I said, it looks like a rat, or essentially a half-starved weasel, in my opinion, which maybe that's just me. Over here we have a more standard dragon, so this one looks like a actual proper dragon with stone scales and everything. And next up we have the DLC. So that, everyone, is going to be the end of this video. So thank you so much for watching. Your viewership means the world to me. I know this video has gone on quite a bit longer than I had planned, just based on me talking about the bosses. I just love talking about anything Souls related. So, again, thank you so much for watching. I want to give a quick shout out to my 2 Patreon subscribers. So thank you, Slice of Life for Life, and thank you, Mary the Otaku. Your patronage means the world to me, and the rest of you guys, your viewership means the world to me. If you would like to support me on Patreon, I will leave a link in the description, but it is absolutely not necessary. I do not want any money for this. I just want you guys to enjoy my videos. So if you are listening to this video while trying to go to sleep or relaxing, this is the end of the video, so I would click off now. So again, thank you so much for watching. My name has been Crimson, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good evening.